think we are live. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. My name is Chris Kidd, and I'm a director of Astral Aviation Consulting. For those of you that are unfamiliar with us, we're an aviation consultancy contracted by the CAA to provide a bespoke GA safety campaign. I'm joined this evening by Matt Lane, who's the head of training for our sport aircraft. I keep looking over there because that's where he is on my screen, but he's not actually in the room. And an active single and multi-engine FI and flight examiner. This evening we'll be discussing inadvertent entry to IMC. The aim of this workshop is for you all to leave confident on the actions required should you inadvertently find yourself in IMC, aware of the mitigations you can follow to prevent inadvertent IMC, for example, pre-flight planning and preparation, confident in making go, no-go decisions when the weather is marginal, and over the course of the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask some questions and answers to further your knowledge in that area. We'll also break the workshop down into 4 sections. In section 1, we're going to cover off what inadvertent entry to IMC is and some of the physiological phenomena that we can experience during one. In section 2, we're going to cover off how these events can happen to us. Section 3 will cover the pre-reading scenario that we sent out ahead of this evening. Excuse me. Don't worry if you haven't had time to look at it. We'll be bringing out all of the salient points as we work through it. And then finally, in section 4, Matt will discuss how we can avoid it happening and some thoughts and actions that we can take should we find ourselves in that situation. As ever, and those of you that are familiar with the webinars that we've run before, we'd like this to be an interactive event. So there's going to be a number of polls for you to interact with as we go. We'll also be asking for your input during the scenario discussion, as well as holding Q&A at the end. So throughout the workshop, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to pose any questions you may have. The polls are there to get the grey matter working. They're not marked in any way, nor are any answers attributed to anyone. So please do get involved. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matt, who isn't over there, and he's going to discuss what actually is inadvertent entry to IMC.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everybody. You can see we've got about just under 130 people online and growing as people join us. So that's brilliant. Thanks for taking some time out of your evening to join us and engage tonight. So we're going to start this section with a poll. So if I'll ask Chloe to put the poll up. Here we go. Just a question, again, just to get the brain cells thinking. If you can't answer or you don't know, that's fine. What cloud coverage does broken BKN equate to? So see if you can get the answer there. We'll give you about 10 to 20 seconds. And like I say, this isn't a test. It's just to get us all thinking about some of the things we're going to discuss. So I'll give about another 5-10 seconds. Hopefully people have clicked one. I can't vote. I can't see the answers, but I'll see them in a minute. So, okay, Chloe, do you want to flick to the answers? Let's see what we got then. Okay, so the actual answer is B. So broken is 5 to 7 octaves cloud coverage. So there you go. There's a spread of answers there. So that's something to maybe give a think about, and we can talk about when we come to some of the pre-flight planning octaves. If you can't remember, that's the fraction of the sky covered by cloud, and it's expressed in 8s. So that's why it goes up to 8s. So that's one of the things we can have a think about. But yeah, thanks for getting in the poll there as well. So now I'm going to actually talk a little bit about what actually is inadvertent entry to IMC. So what it is a situation where pilots lose visual contact with the ground due to deteriorating MET conditions. That's kind of a wordy statement, but in simple terms, we've lost our visual clues that allow us to control the aircraft attitude and flight path when we're looking outside at that relation between the ground and the sky, the natural horizon that you'll remember well from flying training as well. And of course, we do it instinctively as experienced pilots. Obviously trainees and that are learning about all of attitudes and where the horizon is and everything. It's something we do instinctively and naturally. So when we lose these visual clues, when we lose that ability to define the horizon, why can it have such rapid and bad consequences? Well, it's all about spatial disorientation. If I could have the next slide, please. here we go. Not going to give you a principles of flight or a human factors, human body lecture. That's not what this is all about. But just remember where this is all coming from. So it's all about humans were designed for gravity, a clear sense of up, and with vision and our inner ears, all those little components you can see there providing our sense of balance. So we mainly achieve our orientation through our eyes, and about the rest of the 20% is made up of those components there, giving us cues as well. So the seat of the pants feel, as we sometimes talk about it. So in VFR flight, in visual conditions, keeping yourself orientated is fairly easy, isn't it? Because we've got that visual horizon to give us our reference outside as well. We can easily work out which way is up. Even in a bit of turns, even with a bit of G, the brain's giving us those cues to tell us what's going on as well. But if we lose those and we have to rely on that 20%, if we have to rely on those components you can see there to give us that seat of the pants feel, well, they can make it worse, because in flight, that regime that humans were never designed for, you can get G, you can get movements in these that can basically, without that visual backup, the inner ear can be tricked. So these inner ear components can be telling us we're rolling or we're straight and level when actually we're not. Okay, so this is why this is such a dangerous thing. So if you end up in IMC and you're not expecting it, you can't trust your internal sense of direction and balance, because it will most probably be lying to you. Okay, and you know, if you've done any instrument flying or instrument experience out there as well, people will tell you that phenomenon known as the leans, yep, which is where this trickery and this lying is coming into you. It's quite a horrible sensation when you realize it's happening to you. And this is why we talk about this as well, because it's important to remember that we can't rely on our natural senses. We've got to rely on the aircraft instruments in these scenarios. So that's a key thing to take away as we look at some of these other sections as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to how these events can happen to us, and Chris is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Matt. It's interesting you mentioned about the leans. I remember flying with somebody a fair few years ago now, and flying IMC on instruments and having such a powerful lean that I had to get the other guy to take control, because I just did not believe the instruments, and it was such a powerful experience for me that I was really pleased that there was another pilot in the cockpit. Otherwise, it could have been an interesting scenario. But yeah, I know what you mean. It can be very, very powerful. But yes, trust your instruments. Right then, so let's talk about how events can happen to us. So let's start this section with another poll. Another poll, please, Chloe. Here we go. Okay, this question then: what are the UK VFR minimas when flying outside controlled airspace and below flight level 100, but above 3,000 feet? Again, we're going to give you 10 to 20 seconds to have a little think about that. What are the UK VFR minimas when flying outside controlled airspace, below flight level 100, but above 3,000 feet? Right then, there's probably enough time on that one. Can I have the results, please, Chloe? Good stuff. Right, the correct answer was A. 52% of you got that right. Well done. But a little bit of a spread in there as well. Remember, however, that when flying at less than 3,000 feet in a fixed-wing aircraft, you only need 5 k's viz to be clear of cloud and inside the surface. Of course, if you're also flying fixed-wing and less than 140 knots, the minimum visibility comes down to 1,500 meters. So it's not necessarily, there can be a multiple answer depending on how fast you're flying and where you are. Okay, here's a question out to you guys, and please feel free to answer in the Q&A box. Does anybody have a practical way of assessing visibility? So once you're flying along, how do you assess the viz? So let me know in the Q&A box. There's a technique that I used to use where I pick a point at the limit of my vision and then start the stopwatch. So if I'm flying 120 knots or 2 miles a minute, if that point's 1,500 meters away, it's going to take me about 24 seconds to get there. If it took me longer, then the viz was better than 1,500 meters, or any less, then I knew I was outside of the VFR weather limit. So I'd either have to turn back or pick a better route with better weather. So, of course, it's better to start doing this as that viz starts to deteriorate rather than going, oh, this looks pretty dodgy. I think I better start working out what my viz is. So ideally, of course, you're turning around or picking a better route before you get to that stage. I think one thing to bear in mind, of course, though, is the legal limit is actually pretty poor weather. So whilst it might be legal, 1,500 meters, okay, it can be pretty difficult to maintain visual. So I'm not sure, depending on how much you fly, what you fly, where you fly, not a huge amount of people might be very experienced in flying in what I would consider to be, marginal weather. So I think if we took a straw poll of like 10 pilots and said, here's the legal limit, do you think that's legal or not, but didn't tell them what the viz was, I think a lot of them would say it was out of limits, and actually it is legal. It's just pretty rubbish. So whilst it's legal, sometimes it's not a great idea to fly in it. So what we've got on the chat box then, Andy Cook, I try and pick a reference point feature on the ground with known distance on the map. Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. It's very similar to my stopwatch one. And Paul's got cockpits of wings tip extrapolated to ground 5 nautical miles. Yeah, okay. I think ultimately it's just good to have an idea, right? Good to have a technique, something in your toolbox which says that the weather's getting bad, I need to go and do something about it.
And I think, Chris, as well, Michael Benson makes a really good point on the ground or in the air, because, of course, the visibility on the ground or in the air can be very, very different.
Yeah,
I was night flying at Oxford 2 weeks ago as well. Visibility at ground level, low-lying fog, really poor, but upper air, it was probably gin clear. But descending from that gin clear into the airport, you could really get yourself in a tricky situation. So yeah, it's good questions.
Yeah, and that's valid. Are we talking horizontal viz at 500 feet or horizontal viz at 10,000 feet? And then of course you've got to think about the slant viz as well. So yeah, but all things to think about. I think what we're really getting to is, though, it can be relatively easy to end up in IMC when you didn't intend to do it, right? Because we've come all the different techniques that we know and love to try and stop us getting into it, but it can happen, right? Different visibilities, etc. Right, so which actually brings me nicely on to the slide you can see on the screen. Let's talk about how it can happen to us, right? So the risk of going inadvertently IMC comes from 2 main areas, which you can see on the screen there, one on the left, one on the right in the Venn diagram. So firstly, on the left-hand side, we can introduce errors at the pre-flight planning stage, which means that unsuitable weather conditions during our flight were not anticipated. So there's either that we fail to get the correct MET brief, sufficient information about the weather, to enable us to make a good decision on a safe route, or we misinterpret the information we've been given. That's one way of doing it. Or, and I think this happens probably more often than not, or more often than we would like, we're in a hurry. So we're in a hurry, we look out the window, go, that looks good. Weather looks good, it's a nice day, so I won't bother looking at the net and I'll go flying. Errors such as those, excuse me, can be due to deficiencies in our knowledge or training, or can be the result of human factors errors, such as perceived pressure, fatigue, distraction, or complacency. The second area is due to errors that occur during our flight, and that cause us to continue into unsuitable weather. So, for example, you have a loss of SA, which means that you don't realize the threat the aircraft's now entering, or is about to enter IMC. It could be us flying into bad weather or allowing bad weather to develop around us without taking action. It could be overconfidence or complacency about our ability to continue the flight in poor weather conditions. People may believe they can cope. I've got away with it before. There may also be peer pressure from other pilots who are flying in the same weather conditions. And then finally, the third point we've put on there is external pressures, or commonly known as pressonitis. So this could be perceived as real pressure. I need to get back home, or I need to get that rental aircraft back to base, or I need to complete a promised flight with passengers. That's a really good example of pressonitis. Passengers are an interesting one, of course, because often passengers don't appreciate the dangers of the weather or the risks involved. They're just there to go flying, right? So there's a whole gamut of things on the slide there that attribute to us going inadvertently IMC when obviously we don't intend to in the first place. So that's kind of what we brigaded it as. I'm sure you'll have your own thoughts. If you do have them, then please pop them into the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll comment on them as we go. But having covered off what inadvertent IMC is and how it can happen to us, I think we'll start talking about the scenario now, Matt, shall we? The one that we sent out ahead of the workshop.
Yeah, that's great. So we sent scenario details ahead of the workshop there. If you haven't had a chance to read it or you didn't get around to it or whatever, that's fine. Don't worry about that as well. And really, I'm just going to talk about the headlines with this subject as well. So this is the kind of scenario. You're based at Coventry. You need to take an aircraft to Gloucester. So it's not too far away. It's got to go to maintenance. The aircraft's got to go there today. Otherwise, all kinds of doom descends from the CAA and the engineers in terms of paperwork there as well. You get to the airfield early this morning, pre-flight prep, and check the weather. So let's have a look. There's a TAF and METARs as well. It's a kind of 1,600 foot, maybe coming down to 1,200. Oh, a bit of visibility later in the day, but we're going about lunchtime. So what have we got? Few at 800, broken at 1,400. Not the best day in the world, is it? Look at that. It's pretty cold as well. 2 degrees, only a 1 degree split there between the temperature and the dew points. It's a kind of cold, wintry day. So it's not the best day in the world, but you know, is it doable? Can I have the next slide, please?
Here we go.
So here we go. This was the day. You can see it's a January day. That's where the fronts. Look at that. Oh, it's a bit of a warm front, big warm front pushing up from the west. So we're going to be in that zone C. So you can have a look there at zone C. Look at that. There's some kind of sub-zero layers, kind of low freezing, a bit of icing in there as well. So now maybe the cues are coming out that this is a little bit more tricky than just the TAFs and METARs would suggest. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide, please. So they decide to depart and go for it at just after lunchtime, just 12:08. So in red, the TAFs and the METARs that it's believed that they saw. But look at this, 10 minutes after departure, amended TAF, and you can see the METARs coming down as well. And the TAF got amended another 50 minutes later as well. Look at those cloud bases coming down, drizzle, really quite poor conditions coming in as well. Look at that, 1250 while they're airborne. Look at what Gloucester went down to. Light drizzle, 600 foot cloud, 3,500. It's quite a drop, isn't it, in just an hour from what they had before as well. And if you notice, temperature and dew point have become aligned there as well in the METAR as well. So there's a lot of stuff forming and going on there as well. So what happens? Next slide, please. Now, tragically, oh, if you could go back, next slide, Chris.
There we go.
Oh, one before that, please. There we go. So tragically, that is what happened. PA28, this is what happened for us. G WAVs, the link will be there to the accident report. Very, very experienced instructor and student. And we're not here to dwell on accidents or sad things that happen or whatever, but just to give you, you know, a thing. This is not a made up scenario. This is not something, you know, this is something that could happen in the UK. We could experience. So next slide, please. So some of the considerations that we, you know, on the day, what did you think of that situation when you had a chance to read it, or if you've just heard about it from me as well? What threats are there in the weather? I've sort of already, you know, alluded to a few of them as well. You know, if you had a chance to look at it, what route would you take? What heights and MSA would you go? Would you go on the trip that day? And this is the thing. And like I say, this is a real accident. I'm not going to go through all of those questions and considerations now, because we could spend a whole evening session talking about this as a case study and get lots out of it. But this is something you might like to take away and cogitate on your own, actually reading that report, you know, or maybe bunch of you in the flying club bar, cafe, or on an evening of your own, might be something you want to just do as a case study. And like I say, this is not to criticize any individuals involved in that day. Nobody knows what decisions and what discussions were happening in the cockpit that day. But this is just an example of the kind of scenario that can challenge us all as pilots, even if those of us really experienced there as well. But I say use the chat box, use the Q&A to let us know any thoughts or whatever. Next slide, please, Chris. And just to show, so actually in real life, if you read the report, the G Uniform Sierra Alpha Alpha was a Cessna that went ahead from the same flying school. They got there. You can see the blue track there. They managed to get there. The green track there is G WAVs, and where it says accident side, that's Breeden Hill, an isolated piece of high ground on the way there as well. And you can see there some little racetracks and turns where it's believed they were trying to maneuver to try and get back into decent enough visual conditions to maintain flight. But like I say, tragically, they hit the ground when either disorientated or having gone inadvertent IMC. So
really, just jumping in there, there's some really interesting stuff coming in the chats here and the Q&A boxes. So thank you for your participation. Many of you saying, you know, it's a no-go day. Let's not do it. Really good point from Michael Benson. So thank you for that. Easy with hindsight, what HF pressures induce them to fly? I think this could be a classic case of pressonitis. I've got to get the airplane there. It's got to go to maintenance today. You know, that sort of stuff. You know, here we go from Graham, not for me, a day at home. Personal limits don't have to be minimums. Yeah, it's a really, really good stuff. It's a thought-provoking one, isn't it, really? I think we've all suffered from pressonitis in the past. And it's just trying to be objective about that and going, does it really need to do it?
Yeah,
really need to know?
And it's time for me to hold my hand up and be totally honest. I was at Bryce Norton, which is just to the east of that slide, well, just to the southeast of that slide as well. And I was supposed to be doing an SCP revalidation test that day as well. We were actually at the club. The candidate had turned up because we were considering going on that day. Because of the earlier TAFs and METARs, we thought we might be able to get away with doing the trip out of Bryce Norton, but in the end we decided to cancel when we actually reviewed the conditions as well. But we were looking at potentially going, and that was on that very day, that very morning, but that happened. So like I say, not always straightforward. Lots of factors. Right, we've got some great stuff coming out. We'll try and pick it up again in the Q&A, I think, Chris. Yeah.
Yep, sounds good.
So let's move on then. So if we can have we'll look at section 4 then. So how can we try and avoid these events happening to us as well? So we looked at the scenario. What kind of mitigations, what kind of things can we do to try and let it not be us? So during pre-flight planning, we should aim to use accurate and up-to-date weather sources. And there's a few things that I'm going to suggest you really want to be looking at, and that. First is an area forecast covering the intended route. So what's the general frontal situation? What are the clouds, the freezing levels that will affect our flight? Are there any local threats such as CBs and that in there as well? It's very easy in this day with such ready access to METARs and TAFs to kind of ignore what, the old school, if you like, the Form 215 that gives us that overall situation. I think it's really important in forming that mental model in our brain of what's happening that day in terms of the weather. Winds as well are still important to get an overall position of the winds, because we need to look and say, how's the wind going to affect us? Is it going to be comfortable for our arrival, en route, departure? Are we going to be faced with, very changeable, movable, or even out of limits for what we're comfortable with conditions? And of course, the thing that everybody is quite comfortable with is getting the TAFs and METARs for en route, for maybe somewhere you'd need to divert and your destination, and aids like SkyDemon, little apps like Aero Weather. We've all got them on our phone. We can just get them at the click of a button live. So people are quite comfortable with getting the METARs and TAFs, but are you comfortable with all of the information in them? Do you know everything that it's telling you and how to define the relevant time periods and things like that as well? If you're using EFBs such as SkyDemon or Airbox or other apps as well, make sure you're connected to the internet and you're pulling the latest information out there as well. Some of them are also doing kind of color-coded overlay tools as well. SkyDemon's recently released one. Others have got one that you can actually see overlaid kind of color coding of the weather. So it shows sort of like red, amber, greens of the weather conditions. You can set those yourself. But the thing to understand with these is what are those colors telling you? What parameters are they working on? And you can set them yourselves. So have you set them to your personal comfortable limits? There's a question earlier, I think, from Michael Benson saying it's important to Keith Thomas, sorry, to say to set personal limits. So, you know, and you can actually set these up in some of these apps now as well. So they're really, really helpful like that. When we're in flight as well, as part of our lookout scan, we should be really trying to look ahead and spot weather on our intended route. And the big thing to watch out for is if we're continually needing to descend to maintain clear of cloud. That's a real key indicator that that things are starting to get difficult for us. Yep. And I think somebody mentioned that earlier as well. You know, that terrain awareness as well. You probably heard of it called the kind of the postbox or letterbox effect as well, where you've got the lowering cloud, rising ground, and we're trying to continue to creep in front of that gap there as well. That's a real key warning sign if you're having to do that, that you maybe need to go to plan B. And as we've already said, the weather conditions can be quite poor. Although they might be legal, it's going to be really quite challenging for you as well. And the lack of a natural horizon, lack of navigation features can make that workload on you very, very high and increase the risk of disorientation, especially over water, featureless terrain and that as well. So really, I offer to you, and I'm keeping this really quite simple deliberately, there's a couple of things here. You need to get a decent weather forecast and understand it for every flight that you're going to do. And if in flight, if you start experiencing worse weather, take early and decisive action to avoid or exit the area. And the biggest thing for me is if you get that inner monologue for saying, oh, it's probably going to be okay, or press on a bit, or, oh, yeah, I think we'll be all right, you know, then stop and think, are you doing the right thing? You know, what is it that's triggering that inner monologue to start questioning yourself as well? So like I say, that's probably the time to start thinking, have I got plan B, and do I need to enact plan B as well? You know, like I say, disappointing your passengers or a night in a hotel might be the best option that day as well. I had in my flying club 3 weeks ago, we had a solo qualifying cross-country student had an unexpected night in a nice B&B in near Shobden, because he went on his qualifying cross country. The weather forecast was good, but when he got there, it deteriorated. He rang my instructor. One of my instructors did the right thing, and my instructor said, "Get yourself into a B&B," and he did, and that was the right thing to do. Might be the right thing for you on the day. So, what should we do if it all goes wrong on the day and we inadvertently enter IMC? So, if we go on to the next slide, please, here as well. Okay, so the key thing here is to stay in control. And then once we've stayed in control, we need to have a plan to regain visual conditions and seek assistance as well. So once you recognize you're losing visual references, you've got to make a firm decision to trust and control the aircraft using the available flight instruments there. And it's that attitude indicator there at the top. I'm not giving you a lesson here about instrument flying or talking about how to fly in instruments in detail. That's not in the scope of what we're here to do tonight as well. And it shouldn't really be in the scope of what you're thinking about potentially at this time as well. So it's all about trying to maintain the correct attitude for straight and level flight. The priority is to keep the wings level, because a turn can quickly develop into a spiral dive and departure away from controlled flight. And try and limit looking away from the attitude indicator. If you need to do other things like change the radio to get help or glance at other instruments and that, really limit looking away at that. Any control inputs that you need to do, you need to make very small progressive control inputs as well. And then once you're staying in control, just trying to keep that straight and level flight, you need to consider the escape plan. Is a 180 turn to return the way we've come? Is that the best and safe thing to do? Are we at safe height? And, you know, think as well about what altitude we're at. And it's all about altitude versus terrain to give you your height as well. Yeah, people often, or sometimes, especially under stress, will look at that altimeter and think, oh, I'm at 4,000 feet as it shows there, I'm safe. Might be, but what's the terrain beneath you? What obstacles are around you as well? Okay, and then seeking assistance. Yep, ATC, distress and diversion. You know, and the key thing here that I offer is don't downplay the situation. Really, an early Mayday call is really the most appropriate thing to do, and be clear on the RT that you've inadvertently entered IMC. You're not qualified or trained. Doesn't matter what language you use or what terminology you use. You just need to get that message across to air traffic so they can understand your situation and give you some help. All right. So summary: stay in control, attitude indicator, wings level, straight and level attitude, and then concentrate on that, and then think, what am I going to do? I need to get help. How am I going to get out of this as well? Okay, next slide, please. So if you decide the 180-degree turn is the most appropriate, and that's because you've flown from good weather into poor weather, and you're thinking, or you know, you've got a good indication that where you've come from was better weather. So I need to turn around and go back there as well. And if you notice, this is one of the maneuvers, well, the key maneuver that's on the PPL skills test there as well. Really, you need to select a gentle turning attitude on the attitude indicator. About 15 degrees is probably sufficient, and it's going to guard against the likelihood of overbanking and a spiral descent. If you keep that kind of angle of bank down to 15 degrees, just keep concentration on that attitude indicator, and with occasional glances at the DI to look at what heading that you're aiming for as well. And when you get round back onto the 180, it doesn't have to be exact. You're just looking for about 180 degrees. You need to reselect the straight and level attitude to exit it. And there's a key thing here as well that people often forget. So once you've successfully made that turn, keeping everything nice and gentle and under control, once you're back to straight and level, going in the opposite direction, remember you're going to have traveled some distance while you're performing, you know, while you've inadvertently gone into the cloud and while you're performing the 180 instruments on instruments. So you're going to have to wait a little bit to fly back into that good weather. So if you don't immediately come out of it, don't panic. Remember, you might need to maintain that reciprocal heading for a little bit until you get back into that, hopefully back into that that good weather there as well. If the 180 turn doesn't get you out of it, you need to accept you may have to fly in instruments longer, and that's when you're really going to start needing your air traffic assistance to turn, climb or descend as best as you can with whatever instruments you've got to try and get to safety there as well. So like I say, this isn't about teaching us how to fly on instruments, but it's just some things to think about, and hopefully it might prompt you to go away and read up or you know, on a few things there as well.
So just jumping in there, Matt, we've just got something from Andy Cook I saw earlier, which piqued my interest in the chat box, where he says he was under pressure to get a Bulldog to the Isle of Wight, got into IMC over Bryce, and a rate 1 turn got him out of it. So exactly as you described, basically. Oh, Matt's got bored and left.
There we go. Sorry. My dog decided that she wanted to come and join me. So I don't want to bark or anything. Right. So if we start to lose control in IMC, then we need to recognize that and hopefully do something about it. So this is where we get into unusual attitude or unusual position recovery as well. And again, you know, this isn't a teaching exercise, but just to give you some things. And, you know, the takeaways for me are, if you get yourself in a mess, you get in an unusual attitude, I offer to you the things to check are, and the sequence to do it: speed, roll, pitch. First of all, have a look at your speed. Is the speed low or decreasing? You want to increase power or set full power. If the speed's high and increasing, or increasing, you want to reduce the power, perhaps down to idle. If the speed's stable, leave the throttle alone, but kind of monitor it. Once you've assessed the speed and done something about it, roll the wings level using our attitude indicator there as well. Pitch, select a level flight attitude on the attitude indicator, hold it, and then have a check of the trim as well. Yeah, because you don't want to be fighting the trim at this point again. And then just adjust power to around normal cruise setting once you've sorted that out. Again, accuracy, you know, we're not looking for perfect accuracy here as well. And then then once you've sorted it out, you need to have a think to yourself, what happened there? Did I get distracted and lose attention and let the aircraft wander off? Or is there something else happening? Is one of my instruments tricking me? Potentially it could even be CO poisoning, as we've seen in a recent very high profile case as well. So you've got to think to yourself, why did that happen? Could it happen to me again? Is it just loss of concentration, or something worse going on here as well? Is an instrument fooling me? Is an instrument gone wrong as well? So once you've done that, in order to think about the situation, once you've recovered, there's something called heroes checks. It's something that maybe suggest, won't go through it now, but you can read about it on the Astral website. There's an article that goes into all of that in a little bit more detail. But takeaway really, speed, roll, pitch, that's the things you want to sort out if you find yourself getting into an unusual attitude as well. Okay, Chris, so those are the main teaching points I think we've covered. We've got loads of great input coming in on the chat and Q&A.
So I think it's worth pointing out this time so that this is not a lesson in how to fly instruments, and it was never purported to be, and Matt's obviously made that clear. This is some ready reckoning advice that if you inadvertently end up in IMC and you're not instrument rated, how you can get yourself out of it. Okay, so just bear that in mind as you go forward. But as Matt says, we've got quite a lot of stuff going on in the chat box and on the questions here, which is really good to see. So we'll crack on with those, I think. But please keep them coming in. We've still got a bit of time left, so more than happy to go through any questions that you've got. I'll start with the one at the top, if I may, Matt, from Neil Tweedy.
Yep.
Neil says he flies a 3-axis microlight without attitude indicator and turn coordinator. What are your thoughts on limited instrumentation?
So it's a cracking question, and there is a recent case where I think it was a Cap 10 ended up on top of cloud, and I believe, like I say, investigation's still live, so I don't want to break any legal process or any investigations, but there is talk that they recognize the situation, and we're trying to get down through cloud under potentially some ATC guidance, but in an aircraft with very limited instrumentation. That's going to be a really, really difficult situation to be in. If you have got any instrumentation, such as a turn coordinator or a turn and slip, you can fly some partial panel exercises, and it might be really worth getting some practice in with an instructor under the hood, under some foggles or under some simulated conditions, and just having a go at maintaining straight and level and having maintaining turns as well. You can also, especially for permit aircraft as well, EFIS or even portable, like attitude indicators and stuff based on internal, components, are available in that as well. It can come in as well. You can get apps for iPhones and iPads and things as well as backups as well. How well the accelerometers in there are performing and how much they can be trusted on, I don't know enough about it, to be honest, but it may be something that's worth investigating there as well. But I know certainly there is add-on devices and attitude indicators that you can buy at fairly reasonable costs for permit aircraft as well, so it might be worth looking into. But like I say, if you have got any instrumentation, get some practice with an instructor on flying on it under the hood. Might be a fantastic thing to do for your hour with an instructor for your next revalidation. Could be a really, really worthwhile exercise to spend your time doing. Chris.
Cool, thank you. Right, I think you covered off the one from Sharon there, which where she asks, what can you do without artificial horizon? Is there a good phone app to use in backup for emergency? So other phone apps are available, I'm sure. Do any spring to mind?
I wouldn't like to recommend specific ones. There's all sorts of ones you can buy. Some are really cheap, some are quite expensive, and that as well. I haven't tried them enough myself to know how accurate and how relied on they can be, and I suspect some of it relies on the orientation of your phone and whether your phone's mounted or you're holding it and all sorts of things as well. But again, why not, with an appropriate safety pilot or appropriate friend, go and investigate, download one and have a try in your aircraft and see like I say, don't go flying around heads down on your own looking at it, but with an appropriate safety pilot or friend might be a useful exercise to investigate how accurate is it, in good VMC conditions. So
great, thank you. Right, one from Simon Dale. I'd be interested in hear your thoughts on entering IMC and maintaining a safe altitude instead of descending lower and lower with a descending cloud base. Kind of more pays back to the letterboxing you were talking about earlier, Matt.
yeah. So which one? Who was that again? Sorry, that was
Simon, top of the box.
Oh, I'm trying to see lower safe altitude instead of descending lower. Well, I think, Simon, it's very difficult to give a definitive answer to that, because it depends on where you are in relation to terrain, what hazards are around you, and what conditions and that you're going to go into. So this is a good one to go back to the case study and have a look at and think about, because on that day, the freezing level was very low. So it's freezing. So the instructor involved, I believe, had an IMC rating, didn't have a full IR. So you would have expected that he would have been capable and comfortable of climbing and flying in cloud and instruments. But there is a thought that maybe he was worried about icing conditions and he couldn't go into icing. So I think it very much depends on the situation of the day as well, and whether you think you can maintain. But one thing I would say is that if you are going lower and lower, you need to make a decision at some point, either to turn back to get out of it. But if you can't turn back safely because of terrain or high ground around you as well, then you need to make a prompt decision to go into IMC to get to a safe altitude and get help. But it's very much of a balance, I think, there as well.
Right, thank you. They're coming in thick and fast now, which is good. So please, again, keep the questions coming.
Yeah.
Right, here we go. We've got from Michael Benson. Does our advice differ for rotary aircraft?
Well, yes, of course. The thing for rotary, the option that you've got in rotary aircraft is you've got the ability. So what we haven't really talked too much about in this lecture tonight, we could have touched on it a bit more, but with time we decided not to, is the precautionary landing. Okay, so we've talked about maintaining flight and that as well. It's entirely possible that one of the things you could do is decide in poor conditions, in bad weather, lowering cloud, is you could decide to make a precautionary landing in a field and sit out the weather, wait for better weather. Yes, you might damage your aircraft in the process of doing that, but better and safer to be on the ground in a controlled manner than suffer a controlled flight into terrain or worse. Of course, with rotary, that option is potentially a lot more available to you if you can get down in a safe area, having assessed the landing site as well. So I think, yes, for the rotary pilots on the call, I'm pretty sure a precautionary landing is far more available to you.
Good stuff. Okay, let's go for one from Hugh Evans here. So without going as far as an IRR course, what sort of post PPL training / experience gaining with an instructor would either of you suggest? Flying under the hood just doesn't feel as realistic as flying as real in cloud flying.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And just remember that you don't have to complete a full IRR course to go and book some instrument flying experience with a suitably qualified instructor and a suitably qualified aircraft as well. So you could just book to go and spend and do a few hours instrument flying with an instructor to get some experience. Even if you can get one locally these days, still anywhere, try and do an SRA, a talk down, just to experience there as well. But I think you don't want to be scared or whatever, but to just experience that actual feeling and the leans and that in cloud, I think is a valuable experience at least once or twice if you haven't experienced it during training.
Brilliant. I think this is going to be our last question of the evening. It's from David Tovey. What are our thoughts on legally flying with VFR on top and out of sight of the surface?
Well, yes. So as people probably aware, again, without going into a regulatory discussion here as well, that you can above respecting the weather limits and that, you could legally be VFR on top, as it's called, above a cloud layer out of sight of the surface. Okay, with the the way the weather limits are now written under EASA, that's above 3,000 feet. That's entirely legal and practical. Now, there's two things here really. First thing is navigation. So what are you using to navigate? Okay, so yep, using your GNSS, your moving map as a source is fine, but you've got to be sure of that navigation, especially in and around the airspace that we've got in the UK. It's a significant threat that if you haven't got any visual navigation features to back up any GNSS source that you're using, you're kind of starting to stack the cards against you if you're in and around airspace, I would suggest. So it's a threat. It's something that could easily go wrong on you as well. But the second and probably most important thing is, well, how are you going to get down again? If you've got good gaps and you're confident and happy those gaps aren't going to close up, that's one thing. If you're over a full overcast, where's the gap to get down? Are you 100% sure your destination is clear to get down? Are you 100% sure there's going to be gaps to get down as well? So yes, I think it's something to do, but you need to do it with caution. You need plan B and plan C in your toolbox ready to use, I would say.
Brilliant, thank you. I think I just lied then. There's quite a few more questions which I think would be worth getting through.
Yeah,
so that wasn't the last question, so let's go for it. So what have we got here? That's from from Peter. In your personal opinion, is the IRR of much practical use, or do you take the view that it's more of a get out of jail free card or jail free card?
Right. Okay. Well, this is a a debate that, of course, could rage around crew rooms and club bars for many hours. I don't take the view that it's a get out of trouble rating. I think it gives you a lot of capabilities in instrument flying. I think it takes your flying to another level above that you get at normal PPL training, and certainly the ability to fly the instrument approaches, I think is brilliant. To the confidence and the capability to go and say take a radar vectored ILS somewhere gives you a massive safety leap on. However, there is a big however, two howevers. First however is instrument flying is all about currency. Currency is king in instrument flying as well. So if you are going to do an IRR and you are going to rely on it or use it, you need to keep current in it. So you need to practice in it. I was chatting to somebody on the phone the other night, and him and a friend go and do an ILS every month or so. They make sure they do it between them and share it just of an evening to keep the hand in. I think that's a brilliant thing to do. I think that's really important. If you're not flying or not using the skills between each revalidation, you're going to be very rusty when you do need to rely on them as well. And the second thing is the capability of the kit in your aircraft as well. Okay, so if you're going to have an IRR IMC rating and going to use it, you need to make sure that the kit in the aeroplane is up to date, databases in moving maps. You need to make sure it's all working, it's all nicely maintained as well. As an examiner, I often go and do tests in flying school, your standard 152 PA28 hack, and often some of the avionics, some of the VORs, some of the ILSs, you get in and they've got INOP stickers on, or you go in the tech log and it's like, or ILS glide path is sometimes variable, doesn't come on, and things like that. So yeah, keep current and make sure the kit in your aeroplane is well looked after, and it's a fantastic rating that I really commend to anybody.
A couple of people agreeing with you there, Matt. Some saying it improves mental capacity to cope and manage the circumstances. Currency is important. I've done my IMC and it's improved my flying no end and practice it every month. So there we go. So I think that's a good thing to do if you can. Right, what else have we got on here? Let's have a look. Okay, here we go. Someone, an anonymous attendee. I also fly a fixed wing microlight that does have an artificial horizon. However, the NPPL does not allow instrument training and it's illegal for me to fly my aircraft into cloud. Would you recommend NPPL pilots to get an hour of instrument training in a Group A aircraft? I think we probably know the answer to that.
Yeah, like I say, yeah, definitely worthwhile to get get some training. And like I say, you can't go into cloud, but you can use foggles and things like that. But yeah, I'd recommend it, getting just some experience in a club aircraft or something suitable. Yeah.
Another one, here we go from Michael Frost. What do you advise when fully trapped in IMC and in contact with ATC? Divert and request an SRA approach? Question mark.
It's difficult to answer without the actual context. So the temptation is to try and get down on the ground, isn't it? But flying a talk down, flying an SRA or maybe even a PAR if you've got a military airfield near to you. If you're not a current instrument pilot or you haven't been trained into it, that's going to be a very demanding activity, let's face it. Yeah. So it might be that you want to try and get better weather. And remember, ATC and in fact London Centre D&D in particular can get access and can see the weather conditions across all of the UK. You know, they have it. If you ever get a chance to visit or go down there, they have, you know, they have big charts all over their walls, electronic charts with colour states and information and that as well. So it may be that an option might be vectors to go and fly to better weather conditions, especially if you've hit frontal weather conditions as well, rather than trying to get a talk down through to the ground, what through might be very poor conditions as well. So I think the thing is it goes back to what we said earlier, you know, ATC are there to help you. If you're upfront and honest with them about your situation and about your predicament, they will prioritize you and prioritize you for help and use everything you can from them. You know, like I said, don't worry about terminology, don't worry about phraseology, just be upfront and honest to get that help.
Cool. Here's one from another anonymous attendee. Can you get the Met Office forecast free? Yes, you can. I was on it last night, in fact. So if you go to the Met Office website, you can sign up for it, and you can get the 215s, you can get the wind charts, task meters, etc., completely free. So you don't need to rely on them to look at it when you're at the club, and you can actually look at them at home.
And there's other apps as well that I can recommend. You know, you're on your phone, you can get for you know, aero weather, for example, people could see it. It's you know, it gives you all the TAFs and METARs there as well. Windy.com, somebody mentioned there as well. And even the Met Office, his own free website, will give you the synoptic situation, so you can have a look at what frontal movements and that are doing as well. So there's a lot out there as well.
I've got one from Kath. SRA, question mark, PAR, please can you explain? So an SRA is surveillance radar approach. PAR is a precision approach radar. Military bases will give you an SRA and or a PAR. If you are in the vicinity of one, you can go there and get one. With an SRA, they will give you left and right, but it's up to you to sort out the height. So they'll give you, should be passing, I don't know, 1,000 feet now, and then it's up to you to check that out. For a precision approach radar, they will give you vectors in 3 dimensions, you know, on glide path, slightly high, slightly low, left, right, etc. Right, what have we got here from Andrew Brown? Interesting, on several occasions, the biggest problem is being blinded by the sun, especially in winter. Yeah, because you get low sun in the winter, of course. Sometimes I had to land on the opposite runway. Okay, when the wind is light, is this worth planning for? What are your thoughts? Because, you know, that does reduce the biz as well, doesn't it? Not necessarily IMC, but it's certainly low biz.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth considering is people often think about landing on the reciprocal runway. Well, if you've got an airfield with multiple runways, accepting a slightly crosswind one might be just enough to take that sun out. So you know, if it's a 0927, you might not have to go all the way around to the opposite runway. It might just be a case of taking the crosswind runway. So yeah, accept a little bit of a crosswind, but that's just enough to get that sun right out of my face there as well.
What we've got here, has the CAA considered adopting FAA IR training standards for you, Matt? Anecdotal evidence suggests this might encourage more PPLs to get the FAA IR.
So one thing to say on that as well, and again, this is, I don't want to go deep into regulations, it's not the topic for it as well. The CAA at the minute is conducting a review of the whole pilot licensing system. There's been lots of consultations and things like that. They're looking at that, and I believe one of the work streams is looking at other nations' training and regulatory setups as well. So, and that FAA IR training standard has been mentioned. There is so it's in EU law now, the basic IR, and we don't know whether yet the UK will adopt that as well, but it basically looks very, very similar to what we already have as the IMC IRR. And the fact that EASA and the European nations want to adopt that, I think is shows what a good idea the IMC IRR is.
Good stuff, thank you. Last one from Paul Wheel, is BRISE part of the Strasser scheme?
So the military airfields are part of the Strasser scheme, I believe. But the Strasser scheme, if anybody doesn't know about it, was named after a chap. I think he was from the Channel Islands as well, and I believe he actually got an MBE for his efforts. But the Strasser scheme is all about if you have to make a unplanned diversion for technical or weather reasons and that you won't be charged landing fees or exorbitant handling fees for that. And it's all about trying to take away that human factors pressure of diverting in somewhere that you think in the back of your head, oh, this is going to cost me a fortune to land here or whatever. The vast majority of airfields are signed up to it as well. There's a few that aren't. Some of the very big airports aren't as well. The military bases will accept weather diversions. I've been at BRISE a number of times when weather diversions have come in. We've helped them and handled those as well. So that's all about trying to take away that press-on-itis factor. It's a brilliant scheme. And like I say, very well deserved. Charles Strasser got an MBE, I think, for his efforts in promoting that as well. It was a fantastic piece of safety work from the gentleman.
Good stuff. Right, this really will be the last question because we're running out of time. Okay, from Mark Streetfield, is Volmet, sorry, he says Volmet is still very useful. What are our thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's a good point. You can still get it on the VHF frequencies, I think, can't you? I think it's largely been overtaken by the availability of information on apps and that, if I'm honest. Yeah, interestingly, about 6 months ago, somebody did make the point that there was an error on Volmet on HF on high frequency. Somebody picked up that there was an error with the recording and it wasn't playing it all properly. And this has only been picked up because this person was about the first person to listen to this on HF for about, I don't know, heck knows how long. So there'd been a fault on this system for a long, long time and nobody realised. So makes you wonder who is actually loosening it, and what everybody's, like say, getting the weather from apps and stuff now. So yeah, perhaps one to investigate, have a look. So yeah,
indeed, brilliant, thank you. Right, let's wrap up, I think. Right, so we are at time now. So we do really hope you've taken something away from this, or at least it's made you ever think about how you can be safer in the air and avoid inadvertently entering IMC, or if it does happen to you, how you can recover safely from it. We would really, really want your feedback. A survey will pop up as soon as this workshop finishes and will also come through to your email. So please do take the time to fill this out because your feedback really is invaluable to us. Firstly, to inform our future topics and the way in which we deliver them. Most importantly, the way in which we deliver them. If you aren't already signed up to our mailing list, then please head over to our website and sign up there. We're running focus groups over the next month, so we'd love for you to take part in one of those as well. So please do that because it means you can have your direct say in how we shape this campaign. Remember also to check out the website for the replay of this workshop if you want to revisit anything. I'd like to finish with a final thank you to Matt, still not over there, for his insight and thoughts. Also to Matt's dog. And also to Chloe for running the tech and keeping us both in check. Also, a big thank you to you all for coming along, because without you, of course, this doesn't happen. So really, really appreciate that. I hope you find this to be a useful workshop and you took something of value away. Thank you, everybody. I look forward to seeing you again at some point, maybe the next session. Please sign up on the website. Please sign up to the mailing list, and please get involved in the focus groups. We really, really would appreciate it. Thank you ever so much, and have a good night.
Thanks very much all, and fly safe. Take care.